As Lady Whistledown might say, and so, my dear readers, we come to the end. This is the final chapter of Measure of a Man. This has been quite the undertaking, but I do hope that I did it some justice. Thank you so much, you guys, for following along with me. I will be definitely taking a little break after this one. And any comments, kudos, tips, and donations would be greatly appreciated. And until then, you can follow me over at TikTok, Spotify, and YouTube, all at sepfanficreadings. Or you can reach me over at sepfanficreadings@gmail.com. Without further ado, SEP Fanfic Readings presents Measure of a Man by Inna Days 22. Chapter 42, Under the Same Sky. August 27th, 2017. Dawn rose like a crescendo. Reds, oranges, pinks, and purples all built slowly, blending into a ballad diluted amongst the expansive sky. Hermione ambled through the pasture, each step taking her away from the tent where her friends slept after a late night of laughter, music, drinks, and more takeaway than they could eat. The only sounds drifting across the mist-laden pasture were distant. Birds chirping, chickens clucking, and the odd quack of a duck. A damp breeze made all the flowering bushes lining the fence dance, including the new white daylilies. She had only one destination in mind: home. The sun peeked over the tree line to greet the fading moon as it crept into the shadows of the sleeping world. When Hermione reached the gate to the garden, intent on stopping by the greenhouse to check on the olives that were showing signs of ripening, a curious sight caught her attention. Floating next to the swing held up by magic were her favorite teacup and saucer. A wispy curlicue of steam rose from the cup. Hermione approached, and a growing smile lit her face. It seized her soul. She knew what blend Draco had chosen before she took her first sip: red raspberry and nettle tea with a bit of honey. Her preference as of late. Settled on the swing, she enjoyed the view of nature preparing itself for one last burst of color. The brisk undercurrent in the air warned of the autumnal ritual that signaled the impending change of seasons. It reminded her of sitting out here with Narcissa. They'd spent a fair amount of time together in the garden until, as always, it caught Hermione unaware. Grief never arrived or left on a particular schedule. She'd always known that. But even 3 years wasn't long enough for its ebb and flow to grow predictable. Still, there was no more sense in questioning when or why the waves would arrive than there would be in questioning the ocean's tides. She simply closed her eyes, allowing the feelings to flow through her. Much like water, grief came in many forms. Some days it felt like an aching emptiness, but not today. Between the waning moon and the rising sun, today grief was a gentle wave that let her breathe and honor Narcissa's memory. She was grateful for both the good and challenging times they shared right here. Flashes of memories warmed Hermione from the inside out as she sipped her tea. Roses and gardening gloves and planting pansies and forget-me-nots. Absurd to think anyone could forget Narcissa. It made her smile, even laugh. Dahlia and Cho wandered out of the tent first, arm in arm, with matching grins, and Susan followed at a more leisurely pace. Cho was off for brunch with a group of her Muggle professor friends. Susan was set to spend her first day off in 2 weeks with Ron and their daughter, and Dahlia was going home to Greg to do the same before he left for the apothecary. "Be careful." Cho couldn't keep a straight face. "Padma's cooking in the tent." They all left after delivering the warning. Well, it wasn't on fire. That was promising. Somewhat. Hermione finished her tea before Daphne emerged and joined her on the swing. She had a plate of what looked like spinach quiche. "Breakfast," Daphne began forking the leafy lump. "It looks right, but I'm not sure if it's edible." "You're about to find out." Hermione's snicker earned her the same scowl she often gave Draco. Daphne pouted. "You're not going to try it with me?" "I'm having breakfast with Scorpius before we go to Diagon Alley as soon as he—" "Oh, shite!" Daphne unceremoniously shoved a forkful in her mouth until Hermione looked at Padma approaching. "It tastes like mushy egg custard." Pansy took the tent down with a few waves of her wand. When Daphne took a second bite, Hermione grimaced. "Don't look at me like that. I know what she's going through." I'd rather avoid a repeat of last night's hormonal breakdown about how she's already failed as a mum because she can't cook. Fair. The closer Padma got to them, the more excited she looked to see that Daphne had at least given her cooking attempt a try. One of Padma's arms cradled her small bump as she squeezed between them. When Pansy wandered over, they made space again. It was a tight fit, but they managed. The silence was short, broken when Daphne dared to take a third bite. Padma's hope was palpable. Is it good? Not bad. It was the same tone she employed with her two children, gentle if a little cautious. It tended to come in handy particularly well when Lucas, her 4-year-old, offered her a mud pie as big as his grin after spending time in Hermione's garden. It has texture. Padma narrowed her eyes. Pansy said it looked toxic. I don't have children, so I don't have to pretend to like anything. I'm as shite of a liar as Padma is a cook. Pansy shrugged. But who am I to judge anyway? I don't cook either. That's why I have Percy and you have Blaze. At least they both know how to order in. Added benefits include no dishes or expectations. Oi! For a flash, Padma was ready to argue, but she paused, finger in midair. Actually, that's valid. No matter how much my mother tries, I'm no cook. Texture's not quite a compliment, but thanks, Daff. I am, however, the leading werewolf healing specialist in the country. Honestly, by demand, I'm the rarity. Chefs are practically pedestrian by comparison. There's one at every restaurant, and that's the spirit. Pansy's eyes sparkled. Looks like someone's back. Ginny emerged from the house in workout clothes. She had been called home early the night before to tend to Lily's sick cat. Reluctantly, Harry had followed. Is everyone back? Hermione asked. Yes. Nearly tipping the swing, Ginny fell across Pansy's lap. It earned her a dirty look she ignored. Harry took Lily to judo, and Dean swimming with your two plus Al and James, which left me time to come back and kidnap Daphne and Pansy for a morning run. Too hungover to run, they said in unison. I know for a fact you both took hangover potions. No excuses. I drag Hermione too, at least for walking, but Malfoy told me you're having breakfast, then going for Scorpius's wand appointment in Diagon Alley. Hermione nodded. They'd been talking about this day for months, years even, but she was still trying to wrap her heart and mind around the truth that Scorpius was leaving. Time passed in a trickle, then a stream. A series of small moments in the pasture, hands held, stars counted, pies baked, and potions brewed. Chickens raised marked the years, and the rock wall on the side of the house grew along with Scorpius. There were no dramatic swells, just peaceful moments in the valleys between. It was the cycle of life. Highs and lows, joys and pains, life and death. A captivating canvas of memories. Every moment had brought them here in what felt like an instant. Hogwarts shopping with Scorpius. It was surreal. Hermione's breath caught. Chest tight, she looked over at Daphne. A knowing sadness passed between them. If only they could see him today, too. Daphne's smile curved into something wistful and proud. How's he feeling? He was worried one won't choose him. Daphne dragged Pansy up with her as she stood, undeterred by Pansy's groans. Hermione smiled softly, thinking back to the conversation with him. But what if there isn't one made for me? Just as there is someone for everyone, there is a wand for each wizard. Hermione pushed the fringe off Scorpius's forehead. We'll all be there with you. He's quiet. Every step toward September 1st has made him both excited and nervous. While Scorpius had changed in many ways, time preserved a fair few traits, too. He was still an intuitive, kind, and quiet child who preferred to talk with his hands, and had moments of surly stubbornness that tested even Draco's patience. They could now spot incoming spikes of anxiety hours before they peaked. He didn't shuffle anymore, instead slowing and holding on a little tighter, or breathing a little deeper whenever he felt overwhelmed. And for the last 2 weeks, Scorpius had started to do that with increasing frequency. Only the promise of Albus and the others had convinced him to go over to Daphne's last night. Hermione started to say more, but it dissolved into a smile when the glass door opened. A looked enormous between Scorpius and his ever-present shadow, Leo, the little brother Scorpius had drawn into existence. A perfect blend of both Hermione and Draco, Leo's blonde hair was curly, and his eyes were identical to Hermione's father's, hazel, and the little boy had her softer features. With Draco's propensity for dramatics and Hermione's anxiety-inducing tendency to charge headfirst into everything, even trouble, especially trouble, life was never dull with Leo around. A long-suffering but proud Draco stood beside her as she healed everything from Scorpius's cuts and bruises from climbing to Leo's broken finger after falling off his broom for the first time. Draco was there for everything, in every way, but he never once wavered. I'm still confused about how Draco's children are nothing like him. Scorpius is kind and good, and Leo is... Padma tilted her head at the sight of Leo jumping up and down, eager to be let out. Scorpius put a steadying arm on his little brother's shoulder to calm him down. Leo is just Leo. I'm surprised Draco hasn't put him in a bubble yet. Only because I won't let him. Hermione shook her head. Also, I wouldn't say they're not like him, especially Scorpius. But Leo is just as direct as Draco. Much to their embarrassment and amusement. I'll confess, it's funny watching him get a taste of his own quirks. And heartwarming watching him in moments of pride. Scorpius was Draco's redemption, but Leo was his salvation. Living, breathing proof that he was, indeed, a better man. When Scorpius finally opened the door, a dog and a boy shot out like light beams, heading in different directions. He followed them at a leisurely pace that was very much Draco. He got distracted by a small plot of rehab plants that had been moved outdoors. Always just shorter than Albus, last summer he'd grown past his best friend. Now he was a head taller and stood at Hermione's chin. They'd be face to face soon, and she didn't know how that made her feel. But she didn't let herself focus on that, welcoming the energy only a 4-year-old could provide. Mummy, I'm free! Leo opened his arm proudly. Miss Susan said I can take it off. It was the sling he'd been in all week, after dislocating his shoulder when he fell out of the olive tree Lucas dared him to climb. It wasn't his first fall, and considering his affinity for climbing and heights, much like his brother and father, it wouldn't be his last. That's good, love. Hermione got off the swing and drew him in for a hug. And what are you going to do next time? Not fall. Leo was extremely proud of his answer. Every adult nearly choked to hold back their laughter. Daphne coughed right around the time Scorpius made it to the group. He signed his concern, which she responded to with fluid ease that came after years of signing, assuring her nephew that she was fine before handing her plate to Pansy and accepting his hug. If they held on a little longer, Hermione knew why. She touched his face, whispering something only they could hear, and Scorpius touched the ends of her hair. A fraction of the tension he carried seemed to settle. Fade. With Astoria on their minds and hearts, the sadness didn't last. He came to Hermione's side, leaning against her, and she wrapped an arm around him, pressing a kiss to his temple. Hi, love. Did Harry drop you both off? Scorpius nodded with a little smile. Did you have fun? Yes. Leo peered at the quiche on the swing next to Padma. Is it alive? Out of everyone, Padma laughed the hardest. It might be. Padma pinched Leo's flushed cheeks, then glanced at her watch. I have a flu call with Parvati, who is already planning my Dohale Javan. Daphne made a face. She's planning your baby shower from Bucharest? Parvati had been living with Charlie and running a local wizarding paper for the last 2 years after a string of acclaimed work catapulted her into stardom. Draco kept a copy of the article she'd written after Narcissa died 3 years ago in his top drawer. Hermione knew the days he pulled it out to read were the days he missed her the most. Yes, but it'll be in December. They're staying until the baby's born. Maybe Molly will use the long visit to convince them to add to the Weasley horde since you and Percy refuse to, thank you very much. Pansy ruffled Leo's hair. He didn't hate it nearly as much as Scorpius, who had already stepped back preemptively. Besides, you lot have the parenting thing all covered. Luna and I will be the fun aunts. Hermione reflexively patted down the back of his hair. Can I feed the chickens, Mummy? Leo stuck his lower lip out and widened his eyes. You can, but don't chase 13 and 14. Oh, and don't play in the duck pond. He was notorious for it. They added it to the coop after Draco and Scorpius found a duckling caught in the twigs in the stream. Yay! The little boy cheered. I won't, I promise. He most definitely would. Without being asked, Scorpius went with him. He was always so protective of the brother who looked up to him, as if he'd arranged the very stars in the sky. When they were far enough down the cobblestone path, Scorpius said something that made Leo laugh, and soon they were entering the coop together. A familiar warning whistle rang out from the doorway, and despite nearing the trees, A started running back in blurry waves of fur. Draco. In black joggers and short sleeves, he looked like he'd just woken up. Hermione let her eyes linger on the flashes of red and orange in the dragon's brilliant scales that piqued her curiosity so long ago. Now openly displayed, that part had changed over the years as he filled in the blank spaces with new meaning. Right now, Draco looked as tired as she felt. The reason for their lack of sleep in the last 6 weeks was cradled in his arm. Rose. Named for the flowers her grandmother loved most. Judging from one moving mitten and the large steadying hand on her back, she was awake, and the only one ready for the day out in the pale blue romper. The matching headband dangling from Draco's wrist meant Hermione would have to attempt to put it on. Draco apparently hadn't been able to. Once everyone awed over the baby, they said their goodbyes. A finally made his way over to them, with his tongue out and tail wagging, and waited patiently for Draco's attention, which he got with a scratch behind the ears and short command to go watch the boys. They trusted him in the coop. The dog hadn't once eaten a chicken. He was as good with them as he was with anything smaller than himself, which was a long list. Hermione lifted on the tips of her toes to press a greeting kiss to Draco's lips before laying a hand on her daughter's back to do the same. "How was your night?" Last night was his first night alone with Rose, and Hermione's first night away from them both since the birth. "Good." Hermione's voice made Rose's gray eyes open, and after slipping the headband off Draco's wrist and onto her daughter's head, she smiled. "It's been a while since we were all able to get together like this." Life was busy before Rose, but now the word had taken on entirely new definition. "How was she?" "She slept all night, except for feedings and changings." Draco was good about her schedule, about most things, really, and she never really had to check behind him or worry. He was her partner. Husband. She'd been right. It was the name Hermione liked best of all. Surrounded by flowers and apothecary roses in full bloom, they'd been married in the greenhouse rose garden at dawn, on the summer solstice, 5 years before. Both dressed in ivory, their smiles never faded while Kingsley bound them together for life with warm gold cords of magic. Witnessed by her parents, Narcissa, Andromeda, Scorpius, and the puppy, it was a peaceful day full of love. A day to remember. Of course, nothing was ever quite that simple with their friends. Narcissa and Pansy threw a reception disguised as Narcissa's society farewell party, a solstice party with more guests than they could name. Music and food and activities were plentiful. Last light was spent at the Stonehenge replica, leaning back on Draco's chest. The people they were the year before felt a lifetime away. When the fireworks started, Draco took her hand and they left with a pop. The party was all anyone could talk about for weeks. It made for the perfect distraction as none of their guests, save for their friends and family, found out they'd actually attended their wedding reception until Hermione's official name change went public during their honeymoon. Magic was efficient to a fault. Hermione Granger became Hermione Malfoy on every correspondence and publication, every paper and form, even her office door. News spread like wildfire. The media erupted with theories about the length of their relationship. Speculation was rampant, and even amongst their closest friends, there were questions about why she changed her last name, especially after being so adamantly against it. While Hermione's personal opinion hadn't changed, and Draco didn't care one way or the other, Scorpius had been her deciding factor. He was and always would be a Malfoy, and they were a family. She refused to create any division with hyphenated names where none needed to exist. "We should get everyone ready," Draco said when Rose began to doze to the rhythm of his heartbeat. "Your parents are meeting us in Diagon Alley in an hour." Hermione grimaced at the thought of keeping her mother waiting. Not that she would say anything to their faces, but the irritation would be felt. The thawing hadn't happened until Narcissa took a turn she never recovered from. She'd passed when Leo wasn't much older than Rose. Draco's grief hadn't changed Hermione's mind about the level of civility with her own mother, but her mother's perspective began to shift. Maybe it had to do with the little space she had in Hermione's life and thriving family. Maybe it was witnessing her dad's bond with Scorpius intensify, Or maybe it was because of her mother's own changing heart. Hermione could never be certain, but whatever it was, her mother began to reach out more. To try. Hermione agreed to weekly dinners, but only expended as much energy as her mother gave. Even now they were civil enough to maintain a status quo, but neither of them challenged it. Her mother adored Leo and Rose, and grew to understand her bond with Draco. But like Scorpius, who she also tried to foster a connection with, Draco remained cordial yet distant. But today wasn't about any of their issues. Today was about Scorpius. He never asked for much, but he had asked if Hermione's dad could be there for the appointment to get his wand. When her mother had asked if she could come too, he hadn't said no. Still, he hadn't said... Fingers curled under her chin as Draco tilted her head up. The cool brush of his wedding ring against her throat made her thoughts still before his lips covered hers. I love you. Draco's quiet affection was bold in the face of the rising sun. Stop thinking so hard and go get dressed. Rose de Vence, the apothecary, a place Draco spent as much time in as he did their brewing room. No longer a burnt-out husk of ruins and destruction, light poured in from large windows where darkness once lived. Instead of the stench of soot, there was a woodsy scent Greg liked. Instead of scorch and drag marks and glass shards, the walls were painted an inviting color and the floors had been refinished. No sign of the past could be found on any surface. The busy apothecary was the definition of a dream come true. Hold the railing. It was a gentle reminder to Leo as they followed Hermione down the polished iron stairs from Draco's office flue to the store's floor. I will, Mummy. Scorpius still took his brother's hand anyway, helping him walk slower than he would have taken the steps on his own. When they reached the bottom, Draco remained at the top of the stairs for a moment's pause. Hands behind his back, he looked around at the customers milling about, at Greg manning the till, and then at the staff as they helped those who needed it. She could tell he loved what he'd built, and the sales proved others did too. Watching Draco in the little moments he allowed himself to take pride in his accomplishments was an experience all its own. He was having one now. Only when Leo and Scorpius joined Greg at the till did he move. Rose nestled against her chest, asleep inside her baby sling, and by the time Draco met her at the bottom of the stairs, Hermione gave him a knowing look. What? You're proud. She fixed his black tie, smoothing it down and plucking off a few stray dog hairs. He must have carried A at some point after changing clothes. All the while, Draco watched her with a quiet intensity. What? You shouldn't hide it. He tilted his head. You call me arrogant at least 3 times a week. Because you are, Hermione rolled her eyes. But there's a difference between being proud of yourself for something you've accomplished through hard work and being an arrogant tosser when you beat Ron in Wizard's chess. I could argue it's a matter of perspective, but if I start now, we'll be late for the appointment. Schedule it, then. Draco's smile turned coy. I will. Diagon Alley was crowded. To avoid the publicity a family outing brought, they'd scheduled their appointments early. Apparently they hadn't scheduled it early enough. The streets were already thronged with families preparing for the upcoming school year. Hermione had taken Scorpius 2 weeks before for robe fittings and book shopping. Draco went with him last week to pick out a new broom, and today they would complete his list. He needed a wand and an owl, 20 chickens, a rescued duck, who thought it was a chicken, 3 rabbits Scorpius found abandoned as babies during a walk through the woods last fall, and a 100-pound dog named after his best friend weren't on the list of approved Hogwarts pets. A bubble of space formed around them as they moved down the sidewalk towards Ollivanders. Hermione was used to the attention, but both Scorpius and Leo shied away. The former kept close to her while the latter was in Draco's arms, with his face tucked into his father's neck and his thumb in his mouth. Draco and Hermione were joined by their free hands, and though Draco spent more time in Diagon Alley, he was uncomfortable when people stared. And everyone did. A lot. All the time. Outings alone and trips with the children. Ministry galas and society events. When they were together, people watched like they couldn't get enough of them, as if the concept alone was fascinating. How can I help? Hermione murmured to Scorpius. I'm fine. Still, he held her hand tighter. It wasn't until he spotted her parents outside Ollivanders that he relaxed enough to let her hand go. Scorpius hugged her dad like they didn't see each other weekly. Her mother approached, ruffling Leo's blonde curls. Darling boy. Leo held Draco tighter. Still shy in public, I see. Her mother tisked. We'll have to work on. Apologies for the wait. Draco ignored her, but Hermione knew he was irritated out of protectiveness. He never liked when anyone, whether they meant it maliciously or not, tried to shame either of their children. Hermione didn't either, and was never one to hold her tongue, especially when she tried to pinch his cheek, which only irritated him more. Mum, Leo is warming up. He'll be fine when he's ready. Isn't that right, love? Yes, Mummy, he murmured around his thumb, lifting his head. I mean no harm. The apology was surprising. Draco whispered something in his son's ear before smoothing his brows, something Scorpius had done to him many times. It made Leo smile and relax. Besides, we haven't been waiting long. Following the statement, she and her mother stared at each other for a moment that was constant each time they were in the same room, a moment when they silently made the decision if they would hug or not. Today they didn't. Instead, her mother placed an awkward kiss on her cheek. You're looking rested? I am. She wasn't, but the effort was appreciated. And then she moved to coo with the sleeping baby nestled against her chest inside the colorful sling. You must cover her head with the hats I bought you, Hermione. She has too much hair to fit in the hat and gets fussy when her head is covered. She's fine. Hermione sidestepped her mom to hug her dad. He clapped Draco on the back and teased Leo, then doted over his sleeping granddaughter. Rose looks more and more like you every day. You're saying that to make me feel better. Hermione laughed. Pregnancy and hours of labor had produced 2 children who weren't nearly as pale as Draco, but still looked very much like him. Hardly anyone noticed the subtle hints of her due to the striking, signature Malfoy features they'd each inherited. Leo had his father's hair. Rose had Draco's piercing eyes. A slightly amused Draco caught her glare and opened the door to Ollivanders for everyone, but he kept a steadying hand on Scorpius, who looked around in wonder at all the boxes of wands. They walked the shelves while the wand maker picked a few that he thought might work. By the time they got started, Scorpius was eyeing a box that was placed away from the others. Oh, those wands over there just arrived for the Magical History Museum opening. Donated from the museum in France. They're perfectly safe to hold, but purely decoration, as the likelihood of them finding a master is slim to... Scorpius picked it up, and the box began to shake. Beams of light poured from the cracks, startling the wand maker. Scorpius uncovered the box, and the wand gave off a light bright enough for Leo to vocalize his awe. Wow! When it dimmed, the old wand maker put on his glasses. Ah, looks like this wand has chosen its new master. He accepted the box Scorpius almost dropped in surprise. Let's have a look, shall we? The old man plucked it from the box and handed the wand to its new master. Scorpius closed his eyes the moment it was in his hand. Peace settled where turbulence once was. She and Draco exchanged relieved smiles. 11.5 inches, somewhat springy, alder, thestral hair. The last bit made both father and son eyes widen. Scorpius knew what thestrals were, having seen one in person 2 summers ago when they visited Ireland. He'd been at his grandmother's side during her final moments. They all had. It's almost unheard of for a wand core. The wand maker looked up from his inspection. It chose him, if that's your concern, Mr. Malfoy. Mum? Scorpius looked at her in worry. What if... There's really nothing to worry about. The wand maker smiled gently. The wand chooses the wizard, and this one chose you. The core is rare, very. I know less than 10 in existence, and 4 of them are here in my shop. Hermione knew of one, the Elder Wand, and now this one. The wand maker closed the empty box. I will say that I do know both the wand maker and its master have to be able to see thestrals in order to utilize their hair, which means they had to witness death. Scorpius had seen death. Support from them and therapy had taught him that death was a part of life, and he fully accepted the concept. That he'd been able to see the thestrals at all was proof of his understanding. He just needed a reminder. Remember what we learned. Thestrals might look scary, but just because you can see them doesn't mean they're bad luck, Hermione said. They're friendly, gentle, and intelligent. They're loyal and brave, and helpful. Like you, Hermione's dad added. Scorpius looked over her shoulder, eyes wide and earnest. I do believe this wand chose well, the wand maker insisted.
It knew you were worthy even before you held it. Now that's rare."
On the walk to the magical menagerie, Hermione could hear the wheels in Draco's head turning as he began the slow slide into worry. In a role reversal, she stopped him by slipping her hand in his. "I know it's ironic coming from me, but don't overthink this."
"Let me guess." Draco's eyes slid to hers when they reached the door of the shop. "When we get home, you're going to
research everything I know about wand lore. Absolutely." She broke out in a smile, then a soft laugh, before resting a hand on Rose as she began to stir. "I'll make some flu calls, and
I was wondering what you'd done with my wife."
"I'm not worried about the wand or what it means. I think the wand maker was right. Scorpius hasn't had a conventional start. Why would he have a conventional wand? But it'll ease everyone's nerves with more understanding. That's always been our way." Something else that had always been their way? A love of lost causes. And while they did finally break down and buy an owl, Scorpius had also taken notice of a too small for its age half-Kneazle with bad vision. They couldn't leave it behind. When Draco tried to talk him out of taking the cat to Hogwarts, Hermione kneeled between her sons and stroked the fur of the cat purring against Scorpius's chest. She peered up at Draco and could see the signs of defeat. "He's cute." Her mother didn't sound sincere. "The name is Hugo," Scorpius said automatically. The half-Kneazle purred in approval. "Like the writer and painter," her dad smiled. "It's a good, strong name. Intelligent."
"Let me guess. One of everything cat-related?"
When Scorpius grinned, Draco heaved the sigh of a man who had lost many battles that led to their array of pets and livestock, but also one of a man who would do anything to make his family happy. He left to find someone to pay, and Hermione took the opportunity to tell them about Crookshanks. "Did you know Kneazles are excellent judges of character?" The two shook their heads, hanging off her every word. "My first cat was a half-Kneazle who tried to eat a bad man disguised as a rat while I was at Hogwarts." Leo gasped. "So he'll protect Scorp?" "He will." August 28th, 2017. Draco took the boys swimming on Saturday mornings, but each night he swam alone. Guided by the light of the moon, Hermione walked the glassed-in path connecting the pool to the conservatory. Draco was floating on his back in the center of the water, his eyes fixed on the star-filled sky. Through the glass ceiling, it looked like the galaxies multiplied, reflected endlessly between the ripples in the water and the panes of the glass overhead. He was the picture of relaxation in a place that provided peace. A place they designed, built, and made memories together. Breaking ground had been the wedding gift Draco hadn't expected. Standing on the edge in a swimsuit a bit too snug for her liking, Hermione dipped her foot into the water. It was warm, just for her. He'd been waiting. She didn't hesitate before joining him. It took some time to reacquaint herself with swimming, but after a bit Hermione drifted over to the man who'd been waiting patiently. They floated together under the stars, and the lights around the pool dimmed with Draco's whispered spell. Alone time like this didn't come without effort and planning. "Kids," Hermione murmured. Everyone sleeping. It took the boys climbing. Even with the additional holds, Scorpius had long since outgrown the starter wall on the side of the house, but Leo wasn't far from conquering it. Draco took him for classes and had developed an affinity for the hobby as well. Then I flew with Leo. To wear him down? Mm-hmm. He's too young to climb at the center, so I took him flying while Scorpius slept. It worked. He fell asleep during story time. Rose, too. She's fed, changed, and tucked into the bassinet. We have time. Draco kissed her wet shoulder. Pets are taken care of. The boys fed the duck and chickens. Charms are set. Stop going through your mental checklist. I took care of everything. His competence was still so attractive. Sorry, I thought I'd be around to help. Guilt rose, but Draco's wandering hands tempered it. My meeting with the university lasted longer than it was scheduled. They met quarterly to go over the budget, plans, and progress of the manor sanctuary. Draco had signed over the land, but the donation came with a seat on the board, a seat which Hermione filled. It was inspiring watching Draco hope for the land come true, bit by bit. Neville was even present today, which was a nice surprise. He had played an active role in the propagation process until last summer, and McGonagall tapped him to fill the position. He and Luna had moved into a house not far from Hogsmeade. Luna still traveled for work, and brought back all sorts of creatures for the students to see as an added bonus. Unsurprisingly, the popularity of care of magical creatures had exploded. Hermione wouldn't be surprised if Luna eventually accepted a position at the school as well. But Hogwarts couldn't house many creatures, and the Forbidden Forest was only a sanctuary to certain species. Once Luna realized how extensive the lands around the manor were, she mentioned plants weren't the only thing that might need a new home. Not for the first time, Hermione thought Luna might be onto something. A centaur herd showed up first, then goblins, next other beasts and spirits. Magic breathed life into the expansive lands, making it much more than what it was intended. Padma's wolves learned the earth that calmed them before each full moon, and how to care for plants. They volunteered in droves and were integral to the project's success. Padma had even moved her first therapy sessions out there after seeing a significant change in the wolves who were naturally more settled in that environment. With the land returned to nature and used to propagate and enrich, a sense of harmony permeated the grounds. There was a balance and order in the lack of intervention.
How did it go?
Draco drew her from her thoughts.
Anything pressing?
No, it was productive. The talk had led to a favorable vote to begin accepting volunteers outside of students and wolves. Social centaurs and anyone else who cared for the land, regardless of designation, would be welcome to help tend to the grounds, with one exception. One specific part of the manor sanctuary was under Hermione's personal purview. The formerly overgrown rose garden had been cleaned up and dedicated to Narcissa Malfoy. The family matriarch had chosen to be buried there, close to her home and the man she loved. Draco brushed a kiss against her temple.
Good.
And your evening, aside from kid wrangling?
No meetings, per se, but Percy wanted some advice.
Oh?
He needed my opinion on a gift for Pansy.
Draco shifted his hands on her.
He's convinced her to hire people and expand her business. I told him he could take professional pictures of our house for her portfolio.
The kitchen, the add-on library, the second floor of the conservatory, the nursery with its pale yellow walls, the pool, their bathroom, the add-on closet, all designed by her.
I scheduled it for Thursday.
Gray eyes wandered to her lips and then back as she traced the flames on his shoulder.
Don't worry about getting the house together. Andromeda will handle it while she's here watching the kids.
The house would literally shine. Hermione winced, but she wouldn't turn down the help. Between Andromeda, Molly, and Catherine, she'd been afforded plenty of breaks after Rose's birth. Admittedly, they were needed. She recovered from Leo's birth within a few weeks, but this time things were slower. Different. She was only just getting comfortable in her skin again. With her leave already extended once, Hermione quietly considered making it longer. Less out of need and more driven by the selfish urge to spend as much time with her family as possible. She doesn't have to.
You are going to take yourself on a date.
Draco nipped her lip.
Then you're going on one with me.
He wouldn't tell her where, only that they weren't coming back the same night. It could mean anything from spending the night at Draco's favorite spot or a portkey to another city. She'd experienced both, and anticipation for a night alone with her husband reminded her of something else. Just so you know, Hermione wrapped her legs around his hips, I was cleared at my appointment.
Oh?
Mm-hmm. So whatever you're planning, I know you're ready. And he had been patiently waiting since sex became too uncomfortable. Aren't you? She certainly hoped so.
I am, but I'm also a patient man.
Hers. Draco kissed her short and sweet, lips moving as he slipped the straps of her swimsuit off her shoulders, one after the other. He carried her out of the water with care. Drying them off with a charm took more effort, but before Hermione knew it, she was lying on her back by the pool while her husband worshipped every inch of her. Every new and old scar, a duty, every stretch mark, a decision. Every part of her he loved, a choice. The worries in Hermione's mind fell silent. Firm hands spread wide over her aching muscles, kneading away every bit of stress and focusing on each pressure point. Like he did with everything, Draco took his time. Deep, intoxicating murmurs of her affection sank into her skin, sealed with kisses and warm palms between each pass.
Feel good? Yes, Draco hummed. More. Always. Hermione was boneless and pliant when he finally rolled her back over and started massaging her feet and legs. She bit her lip. What's on your agenda for tonight? You. August 29th, 2017. Charles wasn't surprised to see her in his doorway, but Theo was. I believe you've extended your maternity leave until December. I have, but that doesn't stop me from visiting with tea to help you both over the afternoon slump. It's from the greenhouse. Scorpius helped blend it. She held up the tin thermal to two men who regarded her with varying degrees of disbelief. Hermione came clean, but not until after Charles pulled 2 teacups from his drawer and served them. Hermione passed. I wanted a status report, but no one would give me one. Imagine my surprise when I found out it was because you two and Roger told them not to. And there it is, Theo smirked. Draco is at the apothecary, so I have at least 30 minutes. How did the extrapolation go? Well enough. Theo was cryptic as always. They were still narrowing down which components in Narcissa's potion effectively slowed down the disease. So far, no one ingredient was conclusive. It seemed more likely due to the combination of several, and how they were blended. Production is going well, too. Quickly, we're almost at the point where we've transitioned everyone over. The product of their combined dedication had inspired hope in many, even added years to their lives, and it had all started with one. Sitting here, it was impossible not to think of Narcissa. Narcissa who hadn't backed down, who had faced her disease as boldly as she had tackled her regrets. Eventually a shadow of herself, Narcissa became a stranger in Andromeda's home outside of the rare lucid moments. Charles knew, just as Hermione did, what their dwindling nature meant. She remembered the last one like it was yesterday. Narcissa's eyes were as clear as a cloudless summer day, and they prepped Scorpius quickly. But there was no need. Peeling the tangerines to keep his hands busy, they snacked on fruit as he talked to her using the voice Narcissa treated like the greatest gift. Draco did the same until her wistful sigh turned into a smile as she looked out at something none of them could see. He kissed his mother's forehead like he knew it would be the last. And it was. Here. Theo handed her a tissue. Sorry. Hermione dabbed her eyes. She hadn't noticed the tears running down her cheeks. I'd blame hormones, but I just miss her. Theo nodded. Their understanding stemmed from the endless talks and silences. He'd witnessed firsthand her determination and steadfastness during each success and failure. In the weeks following Narcissa's death, Hermione had been so focused on making sure Draco and Scorpius were okay that she hadn't noticed the intensity of her own grief until it blindsided her. Draco had held her until she broke, then put her back together again, just as she had done for him. It was impossible to explain her love for him, but she felt its overwhelming presence just as she did now. It just was. I think Narcissa would be proud of what we've accomplished. Charles looked at her. The people we've helped, and I've never seen progress like this in my many years in this field. Not just with dementia, but with other neurological diseases. You want to do more, you want to cure, but you are already moving mountains, Hermione. At this rate, in 20 years, we'll be able to test for the predisposition. We'll be able to reach people before they show signs of degeneration. Treat them. I couldn't have done this without you. All of you. Hermione looked at her hands in her lap. I couldn't have done any of this alone. Without regaining her drive and purpose, her love of learning and determination, none of this would have been possible. Not to mention her desire to experiment. In some ways, Draco hadn't been the only one who'd stepped out of the shadows. Hermione had too. And she would keep working, keep driving forward until she'd done all she could. We aren't finished. No, we're not. Theo checked his watch. But the cure won't be found today or tomorrow, and you're on maternity leave. So I am. Hermione tapped her chin. If we agree on status reports via regular flu calls, I won't turn up. I do trust you all in my absence, but this has always been about more than just research. It was personal. We know. Charles rose to his feet. And you know my flu is always open. But today you should enjoy time with your family before Scorpius leaves for the school year. I will. Theo made the slow walk with Hermione to her office. I got an interesting call last night.
Hermione perked. Oh?
Scorpius.
He'd started reaching out to Theo more since Narcissa passed. For as much as everyone had prepared him, he seemed to take it especially hard. His comfort was found in quiet moments with his godfather. Theo was a stand-in opponent for practice in hopes of one day beating his father at wizard's chess. That hadn't happened yet, but it led to Scorpius talking to him more, confiding in him whenever he needed an ear that didn't belong to his parents. Theo couldn't get enough, and had grown to love Scorpius, not as an extension of Astoria, but for the boy he was. Nothing more, nothing less.
He wanted to talk about his wand, but he wouldn't tell me why.
His wand core is thestral hair.
Really?
Yes. We know it's very rare, but there's a wand maker in France who crafted the wands in honor of his late father. I, for as rare as it is, think it's a fitting core. But the stigma...
I think he's more worried about leaving than he is about his wand.
Emotions were still tricky and manipulative. Sadness at leaving, excitement for a new adventure, fear of the unknown. They all looked different on the outside, but she knew they could masquerade as one another with little effort. I know he is. She looked down at her feet. I'd selfishly let him stay, but I know he has to go to learn to become his own person away from us. They made it to her office, and Theo opened the door.
I bought Leo something.
There, on her desk, with only a red bow and no other wrapping, was a children's dictionary. It was a newer edition than his brother's, but the sentiment remained.
Figured it was time to get him one, too. Scorpius is probably outdated by now.
Hermione grinned. And everyone says I have no imagination. Scorpius had outgrown his, but he still kept it, up high and safe, out of his brother's unintentionally destructive reach. It sat alongside the Britannica Theo had bought him for his last birthday, and the many books he'd acquired over the years that lined his sets of shelves in their expanded library. Ever impressionable, she knew Leo wanted his own. She just hadn't realized Theo was paying attention, but it shouldn't have surprised her. He'll love it. After she picked up the book, Theo cleared his throat before she could turn to her flu and leave.
If you don't mind, I'd like a recommendation for a tea shop.
Theo's request was quiet and a bit too formal.
Something less like Madame Puttyfoot's, but not a chain either.
What? Hermione couldn't hide her surprise. I thought that was done ages ago.
We did too. He rubbed the back of his neck. But here we are again, now as different people.
Who had taken different paths that had led them away from each other. The connection between Cho and Theo hadn't ended, only turned platonic as they both found happiness with others. Theo openly dated Lee Jordan for 6 months, a Patil cousin he'd met at the wedding for a year, and Oliver Wood after they'd reconnected at Ron and Susan's wedding 2 years ago. They'd recently broken up amicably. Meanwhile, Cho had spent years in a steady, happy relationship with a Muggle baron. It had run its natural course months ago when the romance fizzled. Not everything was built to last. She wasn't sad, only happy about what she'd learned in the process. What she wanted. What she deserved. And Hermione had watched proudly as they'd both grown along the way. I hope you're ready for the fight. She's not
putting up with anything, I know. I didn't plan to ask, but I just did. I think she surprised herself by agreeing. Neither of us are going with any expectations. It's just tea. Pansy told me not to fuck it up.
The defense was high praise, but not a surprise. Pansy and Cho had worked out their differences thanks to Hermione's meddling and Cho's need for a new kitchen layout. She didn't know exactly what happened, but one Friday they'd both turned up at girls' night with streaks of paint on their clothes and blinding tension rolling off of them that came to a head when Cho snapped after a rude comment and started yelling. At length. Pansy's response to the flushed and panting witch after she finished airing her grievances was the most surprising of all. A raised brow, a smirk, and a single word. Good! They were fine after that. Take her for boba tea. There's a shop near the university that she likes. Theo frowned at her suggestion, and Hermione nudged him. It's less serious and something she likes and indulges in. Plus it'll be a treat after she finishes her lectures. She'll appreciate the gesture.
I'll keep that in mind.
In addition to the gift, Hermione arrived home with an armful of patient folders packed with scans for her review.
as well as status updates and research reports from her team. She thought she might take a little time to read, but was drawn out of her office by a silent house, which was uncommon. Hermione walked around slowly and peeked into the kitchen to find Catherine had cleaning charms cleaning what looked like lunch. Rose was in her swing, already asleep. Wispy hair stuck out in every direction, and mitted hands framed either side of her little head. She smiled at the sight. "Hi," Catherine whispered. "Coast is clear. Mr. Malfoy isn't back yet." "Good. Where's Scorpius and Leo?" "Outside in the garden." Catherine gave her a look. "I think you're going to get a sad pie request today. Scorpius brought in strawberries from the greenhouse while Leo worked on lessons at the table. We washed them together. He's a little blue," which was an understatement. They still had leftover sad blueberry pie and sad apple pie. Draco and Scorpius, whose taste had changed in that regard, were notorious for having dessert after dinner. But Leo, who loved fruit but didn't like it baked, scrunched his nose at the pies. Picky eating was a Malfoy trait after all. With a shake of her head, Hermione excused herself to find them. A fondness settled into her bones at the sight of the brothers in front of the raised bed closest to the door. Leo was standing, all goggled and gloved, while Scorpius kneeled, pulling weeds. They gardened together every day, without fail, and arguably knew the greenhouse better than her. Scorpius stopped and turned to Leo, who watched him closely. "When I go to Hogwarts, you have to help Mum in the garden every morning." "I will." Leo's voice was quiet, if a little sad. His bottom lip quivered. "I don't want you to go." "I have to." Scorpius dropped his hands. "I'll miss you." "Daddy says we could write in the notebooks." "We can." Scorpius hugged him close. "Every night." "Yes, and Mummy says you'll learn magic." "I will." The reminder made Scorpius smile. "But that means now it's up to you to take care of Mum and Dad and Rose." "But I'm 4. "You can still brew with Dad and garden with Mom, and—" Odd. Hermione leaned forward, but before she could figure out why it was so suddenly silent, hands settled on her waist, pulling her back from the doorway. "A 2-way silencing charm?" Her gasp would have alerted the boys to her eavesdropping, but Draco was nothing if not thorough. "Clever." "Leave them to it." Draco kissed her collar in greeting. "I asked him to talk to Leo. I figured it would help them both." That's a good idea." She watched them pull weeds in the flower bed together, chatting back and forth with growing animation. Leo was chaos incarnate, but he somehow brought a sort of peace to Scorpius too. Their brotherly bond had been beautiful from the beginning. Where Scorpius went, Leo followed, and he never turned him away, even when Albus griped about his consistent presence. Holding Rose for the first time seemed to kickstart Scorpius's open hesitation about leaving for school. But watching him with Leo now made her realize it had little to do with leaving home, and more to do with missing them. Missing out on anything and everything that defined home. His family. "We'll send pictures for his scrapbook," Hermione worried at her bottom lip. "I think that'll help." "It might." Draco exhaled before pulling her over to the sofa in the conservatory. She sat on his lap and wrapped an arm around his shoulders. "How was the meeting you weren't supposed to take?" "How did you—" "Never mind." Draco chuckled. "I figured you wouldn't sit still for long." "The meeting went well, if you must know. Everything is going as planned. Potion's team is still breaking down the components. A sharp cry pierced the conversation. "I left a few bottles in the—" "I saw. I'll be right back." Draco returned 10 minutes later with an armful of Rose. She didn't look particularly happy about the bottle hovering next to her head. "I know, sweetheart." Draco's deep voice tempered her. "Not your favorite way, but we've done this before. Remember what I said last time. It comes from the same place, I promise. Mummy just needs to rest." There had been a noticeable shift in Draco since her birth. He loved Scorpius and Leo fiercely, but there was something different between him and Rose. Something different in him. Softer. And it came out in moments like this, when he smiled at her simply for existing, or when he talked to her in low tones while she fussed. Hermione could hear him during night feedings telling her stories. He'd done the same with Leo, but back then he'd also confessed secret worries. Now he spoke only of hopes and wishes. Not just for her, but for them all. Draco's smile faded when they heard the flue activate. Then it curved down into a frown at Albus's greeting to Catherine, which was loud enough for his namesake, who had been napping in the sun, to lift his head. "Only 2 more days!" "Shut up!" James's comment earned Ginny's admonishment. "James Potter, you are not too old for the get-along shirt." "Mom..." "I remember you being this loud before you left for Hogwarts for the first time," Harry said. "Weren't you just—" "Dad!" Like always, Albus appeared first, grin fixed on his target, who sighed like every misdeed was returning for his reckoning all at once. A normal greeting for Albus Potter. "Hi, Uncle Draco!" At least he had the decency to lower his voice after seeing Rose in Draco's arms. But that didn't stop him from approaching his favorite adult after he waved at the baby. "Hi, Rose!" "Albus." Still, for as sour as Draco's expression was, Hermione knew better. "Did you—" "I did!" The 11-year-old proudly pulled out his new wand. Hermione choked back a laugh. She would recognize that wood anywhere. Hawthorn wood, and dragon heartstring core. Even from the doorway, Harry sounded put out. Ginny patted his back. Albus hugged Hermione tightly, and she ruffled his already wild hair. "Congratulations." "Where's Scorp? I want to show him my wand." Outside, with a little... Albus bolted for the door before she could finish. Quickly followed by James, who was rolling his eyes. Lily came over in a blur, hugged them both quickly, then ran behind her brothers. Hermione's eyes didn't even have time to adjust to her vibrant pink shirt with dancing black cats before Lily was gone. Hermione turned her attention to Harry and Ginny. "I saw you both survive Diagon Alley." "Barely." Harry let out a dramatic sigh. "People were watching." "They always watch." "Doesn't mean I like it or will get used to it." He scratched his beard. "I could always use a whiskey." "Not a chance, Potter," Draco scowled. "You don't appreciate anything that costs more than a pint of butterbeer." It was true. The last time the two had nearly come to blows, when Draco offered him his own version of friendship in the form of 2 fingers of his favorite whiskey. Harry took a sip and promptly spit it back into the glass. Hermione could tell her husband was recalling the incident by the way his glare intensified. But then Rose reached for the end of the bottle. He ignored Harry's existence in favor of his shifting his daughter to his shoulder to burp her. Ginny and Hermione laughed. The rest of the day was leisurely wasted. They went to the tree-lined treehouse with the children and sat around while they played. From there, they picked tangerines and mangoes in the greenhouse. Lily gorged on blueberries fresh off the bush before anyone could stop her. Scorpius surveyed the greenhouse like he always did, until Hermione made him put down the book and hold his sister. They sat under the olive tree while Hermione and Ginny looked on in amusement as their husbands made a competition of apple picking. Albus and James were just as competitive as Scorpius was not, but it was Leo, who was sitting on Draco's shoulders, that won. At twilight, the kids caught fireflies in the pasture. When they all came inside, Scorpius introduced Lily to Hugo, who'd finally come out of hiding. She had 2 cats of her own, but there was an odd look on her face when she glanced at Scorpius while scratching behind the cat's ears. Draco squinted in suspicion. Hermione didn't think of it again until she emerged from the office, where she'd read reports while nursing after everyone left. Scorpius had long since fallen asleep hugging A, his face buried in fur, while a nature documentary played on the telly. Hugo was curled behind him. She found Draco in the conservatory, relaxed on the chaise reading a book, with Leo passed out on his chest. "Taking him to bed?" "He'll wake up the moment I move." Draco adjusted his glasses before running an absent hand over their son's curls. He looked over, catching sight of Rose in her arms. "You?" "Not yet. I wanted a little time with Scorpius, but he's asleep." Draco scooted over a bit, and she joined him on the chaise, where they sat in peaceful silence under the starry sky. The quiet didn't last long. Leo started snoring in long, deep breaths. Draco laughed as Leo's snores grew louder. "So, Lily—" "No." Draco didn't even blink. "You have 0 control over that." "They're children." "I know, but in 7 or 8 years, don't be surprised if—" "I'd rather not think about tying myself to Potter any more than I already am," Draco grimaced. Hermione's laugh startled the baby, but she hushed her back to sleep while her husband looked on with familiar heat in his eyes. "I think you want another." Draco's comment was so quiet she nearly missed it. She shifted her eyes to him. "I think you do too." He was looking at her the way he had each time he stated, "I'm ready." The first time was their first Christmas in Chamonix as husband and wife. The second, while they vacationed at the barely used Malfoy home in New Zealand. And tonight, in their own home, would be the third. You're right. He carefully shifted closer. I do. Not yet. No, not yet. His kiss was gentle, neither moving enough to wake their sleeping children. But practice makes perfect. You might be on to something. August 31st, 2017. Kingsley accepted her basket of fruits and vegetables while she smiled graciously at his gift of honey. And after he made a vegetarian lunch, they went outdoors to enjoy a sweet treat on the porch. Armed with his favorite, licorice wands, they enjoyed the humid warmth that always came at the end of summer. There were more hives than in years past. Hermione chewed on her wand while Kingsley held Rose, who took turns blinking up at him and the world around them. She's very serene. I know. Hermione shook her head. We aren't sure where she gets it from. While their serenity was hard-fought and earned, Rose's was natural. She didn't fuss much, only when she was hungry or her nappy needed to be changed. Daphne suspected she was still getting used to the world and would roar to life in the coming months. Hermione couldn't wait to see if that was true, but for now she enjoyed her daughter. Rose had fit seamlessly into their lives from the moment she was born. Scorpius all packed? Yes, we took him to the cemetery to lay flowers for Astoria this morning, then to Narcissa's to do the same. He wanted to say goodbye to the volunteers. After all, he was one of them during the weekends, when he wasn't playing sports or spending time with the muggle and magical friends he'd made over the years at school. They'd been sad to see him and Albus leave. Good. Scorpius and Albus will do well at Hogwarts. Or Al will become the driving force that convinces McGonagall to retire once and for all, and Scorpius will be there to make sure nobody dies in the process. Or worse. They both laughed. Kingsley sobered slowly and turned his probing attention on her. You know I did invite you here today for more than a routine visit. I assumed as much. Draco was cagey when he mentioned it. He was taking the boys to the apothecary and asked me to bring you an Andromeda vegetables. Hermione realized she'd fallen into a trap, but she was far more curious than defensive. I figured she'd be here, but she isn't. She's with Teddy at the apothecary. He filled in the blank. By this point, I imagine she has convinced Draco to let her take Leo and Scorpius for ice cream, and a trip to the joke shop to visit George. That sounded accurate. Hermione took a bit of her licorice wand. Why did you invite me today? To seek your counsel. Something he'd kept up regularly despite years since she'd last held any official title in his office. Every few months his name appeared on her Magi-scheduler, and they'd taken tea and talk about everything. Kingsley asked for her thoughts on the sweeping changes as the newly reformed Wizengamot, now led by Percy as chief warlock, rolled them out. The power they released back. The order they replaced. She asked for her opinions on foreign and domestic policies. They debated. They chatted. They agreed. They disagreed. At first, the conversations felt like tests, but each tea caused the feeling to fade. She was now comfortable giving her opinion freely, sometimes without being asked. She opened up and offered the counsel he sought. Sometimes her advice made it into speeches or laws the ministry passed. Other times he kept her thoughts for himself. There will be a time I decide to retire permanently. His words, like him, were careful and deliberate. I do not intend to remain minister forever. He'd won re-election by a landslide against an established purist, a sign that those days were well and truly over. Change had come to stay, and it was taking root everywhere, in everything. They were weeding out the corrupt members of the Wizengamot, either through retirement or formal charges. The kickbacks ceased, and pardons based on wealth were a thing of the past. Early on, Draco had been the deciding vote needed to overturn an archaic law. One voice had brought about lasting change. The ministry's actions were seen as aggressive to some who benefited from the nepotism and racist laws, but to the majority, things were improving. They weren't where they needed to be, and the fight was far from over, but Kingsley had fought hard and given power back to the people who had been voiceless for so long. His thoughts of retirement weren't surprising. First and foremost, Kingsley was a beekeeper. Are you planning to retire soon? Hermione asked. No, we are still in flux. We need stability at the top, or the entire house will fall. Then why? Be it 5 years or 15. I will stay and lead as long as it takes for you to decide. The quiet strength of his statement resounded in her. Hermione fell silent as her pulse kicked up with an instant and clear understanding of what he was asking. She felt as if she were speeding down a mountain, rather than sitting outside with her friend and the bees lingering in the air. Kingsley, I'm not appointing you today, or even asking you to decide by the time Rose begins to show you the fierceness of her serenity. Hermione shook her head. I'm a healer, not a politician. Just as Draco didn't need to become a potions master in order to invent, the Ministry doesn't need a politician to lead. It has a beekeeper guiding the course of its current journey. Kingsley turned to her. Who's to say that there is no need for a healer? I believe all you would need to do is exactly what you are already doing. Healing. Despite the overwhelming instinct to run from the conversation and what he was asking of her, Hermione bit the licorice wand and listened. She stayed. Not all wounds are physical, as you know. Some are so deep that even when they are healed, the systematic damage has already taken its toll. I cannot heal them all in my time, but perhaps a healer can continue what I have started. There are many who will support you. I will support you. His words were familiar, a distant echo of something she'd once said to him. Too restless to remain still, Hermione stood and walked to the edge of the porch, leaning on the railing and looking out at the apiary. The garden started there by Neville and his students had grown and flourished ever since. Hermione, I told you before that you would make an excellent minister for magic one day, and it had little to do with your brilliance. I mean that more than ever now. She turned to find Kingsley standing close with her daughter cradled in his arms. Rose blinked up at Hermione when he handed her back. He didn't return to his chair, instead joining her at the railing. Time has made you a better version of the woman you once were, Hermione. His voice was low and gentle. You understand your own power, but love has humbled you with wisdom. Rather than holding yourself back, you now move forward with a purpose. Your family grounds you. Hermione smiled down at her daughter. Pain has made you stronger and taught you how to trust others. You are better prepared now to face tough situations. Your work has made you more open-minded. Dare I say, innovative. You see the world in a new way and better understand its potential. Yes, but minister? I don't know. I'm not finished with my work. My kids are young, and Draco likes the quiet peace we've managed to carve out despite leading very public lives. I like making large changes on a smaller scale, and this would be quite the opposite, I know. But you set a precedent in my office within a couple of months. I can't imagine how you would change the ministry. I trust you will lead by example, should you choose to. He placed a hand on her shoulder. As with everything, this is your choice. I meant it when I said I would wait, and if you ultimately decide not to run, I will respect your decision. Thank you. It's a lot to think about. They stood in silence, listening to the bees humming in harmony. Thunder rumbled in the distance. But I do wish you felt the same strength of conviction you have provided, Draco. I wish you saw the same potential in yourself that you and I recognized in him. Potential that, might I add, has come to fruition in more ways than one. Kingsley returned to his seat and pulled another licorice wand from the box. I see such promise in you, Hermione. I always have, and I am not the only one. Hermione's hackles rose with suspicious realization. Did you? Draco plays to his strengths. Of course he did. And while the knowledge that he'd even consider life as a minister's husband left her reeling, it was Kingsley's parting words that lingered long after they went their separate ways. You told me once that there are leaders, and then there are those who lead. The former holds authority, while the latter inspires. I believe you, like me, can be both. September 1st, 2017. Scorpius was exactly where Hermione expected to find him, in the greenhouse peering up at the tangerine tree, with his gloved hands behind his back. It was so early the grow lights were on, and the moon was still high in the sky. He didn't startle when she approached him from behind, resting her hands on his shoulders. When he leaned back, her embrace turned into a hug. Hermione pressed her cheek against his temple, and they stood in comfortable silence. "We'll see her before you leave." Narcissa's portrait hung in the add-on library, forever asleep. She never woke up, and no one knew why, but they placed her with Astoria's mundane painting. Two women who made the most of what little time they were afforded. Not all wounds were healed, but Scorpius kept her gifted memories close. They were of him, memories of her firsts. Holding him, seeing him smile, hearing him speak. "I know." His response was soft. "Can we stay like this for a little longer?" "Of course." Hermione inhaled as Scorpius closed his eyes and did the same. "Are you nervous?" "Yes." Gloved hands covered her arms, "but also no." "I felt like that too, but I didn't have a lot of friends when I was your age. I went to Hogwarts alone. I read and tried to learn as much as I could to fit in. It didn't work at first because I was a swot, but you're going to have a great time. You've read all the books, so now it's time to experience it for yourself. And you're not going alone." She squeezed him gently. "It'll be an adventure. Make more friends. Be brave. Make your own magic." "What if I'm not Slytherin like Dad?" "He'll love you regardless. But between you and me, we have a bet that you won't be." Scorpius turned his head, her eyes wide with surprise. "He wants you to forge your own path. This is your life to live, and he wants you to make your own choices. And that starts today when you leave, and continues no matter what house you're sorted into. Your history and legacy are important. They tell you where you've come from, but they don't determine where you're going. There are a lot of bad things that have happened in your family's past, things that people might judge you for. But what does your dad say about that?" "The past doesn't define me." "No, it doesn't." Hermione smiled, recalling the many times she'd heard Draco repeat it to his son. "You are better. You have always been better. You have your mother's heart, her spirit, and you'll show the world by being exactly who you are. There is only one Scorpius Malfoy, and the Sorting Hat will know which house you belong in." Scorpius was silent for so long that dawn began to break. "Mum?" "Yes?" Hermione swallowed around a lump in her throat. She would never get used to the twinge of emotion every time he called her that. "Thanks for being my mom." "Thank you for choosing me." Platform 9 3/4 was exactly as Hermione remembered, alive with the thrum of returning Hogwarts students and nervous first-years crowding towards the train with their baggage. Parents clogged the walkways, not yet ready to say goodbye. They'd arrived an hour before the train's scheduled departure, leaving them plenty of time for farewells and final checks. Theo's goodbye came first, Daphne second, then Blaise and Padma third. Hermione's parents brought Scorpius treats to share, and her dad playfully reminded him to brush his teeth after eating. Susan, to even Ron's surprise, got a little choked up during her goodbyes. Cho, who once kept her distance out of resentment, hugged him and wished him well. Teddy teased him with a smile before going to find Victoire. Pansy ruffled his hair while Scorpius frowned. "Being irritated with me is better than sad, so I'll take that as a win." For a second, Scorpius looked at her as if realizing something he should have already known. But the moment ended when Percy drew him away to check everything against the extensive list they'd meticulously compiled one last time. Percy and Scorpius shared an affinity for organization, and he'd been all too happy to help facilitate. Additional extension charms were needed on Scorpius's school trunk. He'd never quite grown out of his love for keeping the things he'd loved close to him, and when asked what he wanted to take to school, he'd responded with nearly everything. Stuffed with clothes, books, his notebooks, and the scrapbook they'd filled both with the new and old pages over the years, plus the cauldrons and everything required for a first year. Well, a featherlight charm was necessary too. On top sat Hugo's cat carrier, and next to that was Scorpius's satchel Hermione had packed with a container of snacks and a piece of sad strawberry pie. Next to that, his forever companion Mint stood tall and proud. Larger, too. He had everything. He was ready. But Scorpius didn't board. All eyes were on them until the Potters came rushing through the barrier, one after the other, with Harry and Ginny pushing through last. Albus had been bouncing with excitement all week, but like Scorpius, right now he stood still. Nerves had finally struck him. James hugged his parents and ran off to put his trunk on the train and find his friends. Ginny and Lily stood back while Harry talked to a hesitant Albus with both hands on his shoulders. Scorpius reached for Leo first, who looked close to tears. He kissed Rose on the cheek and whispered goodbye to his sister, who was wide awake in his father's arms. Then he stood before her. He was still the same, yet so different. A hint of the nervous little boy he used to be emerged, but she tempered it with the only way she knew how. Hermione fixed the bow tie he insisted on wearing, dusted the invisible lint off the sleeve of his robes, and took him into her arms. She held him close, closing her eyes when he squeezed the ends of her cardigan. For comfort, a reminder. "You're ready, love. Leo, your dad, and I will take care of everything. We'll send you pictures. We'll write notes. It'll be different, but not all change is bad." Hermione brushed the fringe of his forehead, and Scorpius relaxed a fraction. "I love you, my brave Scorpion. You know that, don't you?" He nodded, too emotional for words. His eyes were watering just like hers. "Distance means nothing when we're all looking up at the same sky." Hermione pressed her lips to his forehead until he settled enough to take a breath without shaking. Leo hugged her leg, and she rubbed the little boy's curly hair to settle him. Scorpius held her a little tighter before letting go and turning to his father. A quick change from Draco's arms to hers didn't bother little Rose at all. Scorpius wasn't the only one surprised when Draco took a knee in front of his son on the crowded platform. Every eye was on the pair. "I'll make you proud," Scorpius signed slowly. "I will." "You already do." Draco covered his hands before he could sign again. He reached into his pocket and pulled out one last note, placing it in his son's hands. "You always have." Scorpius scrubbed away a rogue tear, clutching the note. "Dad!" His voice was but a whisper. Draco's smile was slow as he hugged his son, whispering 3 words into his ear. Sentiment Scorpius knew and trusted. Still, Draco held on, held tight, and didn't let go until Al came rushing over with Harry, Ginny, and Lily. Less nervous after his talk with Harry, Al hugged Hermione while Scorpius did the same with the Potters and Lily. When Albus got to Draco, he smiled. "Don't miss me too much, Uncle Draco." "I won't miss you at all." "Sure you won't." He tackled Draco with a hug, and the moment it was returned, Al pulled back, grinning victoriously. "I knew I was your favorite." Before Draco could argue, the train whistled in warning. It was time to go. They walked Scorpius and his luggage to the train. With Mint in one hand, Hugo and the cat carrier in the other, and a satchel strapped across his chest, Scorpius was ready to board behind Albus. "Send our love to Neville," Ginny called as she waved. Both promised they would. Scorpius looked back 3 times before vanishing through the train door. 10 minutes later, when the Hogwarts Express pulled off, no one moved until it was long out of sight. Draco picked up a still waving Leo, then took Hermione's hand and kissed it. Only then did her first tears fall. Not from sadness. No, she was happy. All was well. The quietest people have the loudest minds. Hermione hadn't thought of the quote in years, while it had initially pertained best to Theo, upon seeing Draco alone on the charmed hammock in the middle of the pasture, with only the moon and stars lighting the world around him. She was struck by just how applicable the statement was to him as well. His pensive nature used to frustrate Hermione, but it had also kept her alert, drew her attention, and constantly made her wonder who he was and what was on his mind. But now she didn't have to guess. Didn't have to ask. Now she knew. Hermione joined him on the hammock, curled up at his side, and waited for the mood he'd been in all day to settle. Being quiet was his choice, but not a permanent state. "What do you think he's doing now?" His question gave her pause, as did the waver in his voice. "It's 8 o'clock. Scorpius should be sorted into his house and stuffed full from the welcoming feast by now. Maybe he's in his house common room, meeting his roommates." Hermione brought their joined hands to her lips and kissed his wedding band. "But knowing Scorpius, he'll be in the corner with a book, watching the sky." Draco, who had never cared for the stars as much as his son, looked up. Hermione joined him, searching the skies and the place she'd found her home. Peace settled over them when he pressed his lips to her forehead and breathed her in, tethered to each other and the life they'd created. For what felt like hours, they looked with silent hope that Scorpius was taking in the same sight, the same moon, the same stars. "I miss him already," Hermione confessed. It was something they both knew. "I told him today that distance meant nothing when we were all under the same sky." Seconds and minutes passed before Draco tilted her chin up and kissed her long and slow, smiling against her lips. "I agree." "We could go in and check the notebook. Maybe he's written." "In a minute." Draco shifted his hold on her. "I wanted to talk to you about something." His tone made her curious. "What?" "Kingsley told me he talked to you, but you didn't give him an answer." "I was too busy being surprised that you were the one who'd suggested the conversation." "Because I know you." And he did. Who she was before, who she was now, and who she could become. Hermione couldn't speak. Not at first. I happen to know you just as well, Draco." Hermione ran a thumb across his lips. "You're on the Wizengamot and have an apothecary. I'm on the trajectory to cure magical dementia in my lifetime. You don't care for a life in the public eye, especially not in that capacity. And despite being good at it, I don't care for bureaucracy or politics." "All true, but I've always wondered why you were a healer, until I realized this is who you are now, not necessarily who you'll always be." Draco stopped and brought their joined hands to rest on his chest. "I've been atoning. You were right about being part of the solution rather than the problem. I have no regrets, but maybe in 10 years you'll be ready. Or not. Just something to think about." "Draco." "I know, which is why the question comes back to an old one. What do you want?" For all her thoughts on the subject since her talk with Kingsley, there was no clear answer. Hermione pressed her ear to his chest, listening to his heartbeat as they relaxed beneath the stars. A comfortable silence settled over them. With his hand running up and down the length of her back, Hermione's thoughts floated through days, months, and years of moments with Draco's unwavering presence tethering her to earth. Drifted through the creation of everything they'd built from the ashes of nothing, and circled back to the happiness they'd fought for each day. Life was fluid. It took twists and turns, and each choice made was a form of energy. Hermione kept this in mind when making hers. "I'll keep an open mind. I will. I'll keep advising him. But I'm in no rush to make a choice." "I understand." Draco made a low noise when her lips brushed his knuckles. "And until then?" "Let's stand still. Let's continue as we are." This life they'd created wasn't perfect or ordinary, but it was everything. "I may not know what direction to take just yet, but I think that's the best part of the adventure." The journey, after all, was the destination. The end. The end is not only an end. This is the beginning of a new start. Gaurav G.R.V. Sharma. Author endnotes. I hope you have enjoyed this journey. I can finally say the entire intent and purpose of A Measure of a Man was to read as both something of a love letter from Draco to Scorpius, as told by Hermione, who pieces the story of a father's love together while falling in love with said father and son, as well as the story of two people who begin as nothing, form something, and become everything. It was also written to fit neatly inside the 19-year jump post-Deathly Hallows, and become something of the multiverse, leading up to the epilogue, all while making it a Dramione, with changes, of course, Rose as the sister and Hugo as the cat, Al and Scorpius beginning Hogwarts as besties. All themes of family and choice, sacrifice and growth, the many facets of love and hard lessons aside. All other themes aside, it was intended to give Draco an arc that existed both within Scorpius and outside of him, and leaves open the possibility of Hermione turning to canon and becoming minister, or not. Also, no matter how much I trolled everyone, yes, I always intended for Draco and Hermione to have more children. I would never spoil the end of my own story by answering definitively either way.
Also fitting that this story ends on Earth Day for our narrator, who is Earth to Draco's moon and Scorpius' sun. I did not plan that. I wish I had. Lastly, thank you to everyone for the love and appreciation for this little giant of mine. All the reviews and feedback, the kudos, the DMs, the recs, and every single artist who was, is, and will be inspired by this story to create gorgeous artwork. I am flustered by it all and incredibly humbled and honored. I'd make a self-deprecating joke here, but my mind is blank. Much love. In a Days 22.